Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of military combat and war trauma, infant loss, PTSD and mental health struggles, suicide ideation and suicide attempt, veteran suicide, miscarriages and cancer, domestic trauma, hospitalization, and near-death experience. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I have a very special guest with me today. I have with me today Eric Donaho. His story is one of resilience, courage, and unwavering hope. A retired U.S. Army sergeant and Purple Heart recipient, Eric's military career is marked by bravery and an unbreakable spirit, earning multiple commendations. After overcoming injuries sustained in service and surviving a personal battle with veteran suicide, Eric has dedicated his life to helping others find hope and healing. As a national veteran advocate, he's worked tirelessly to support veterans' causes. His impact also extends globally, working with the Center for Disabled Children Assistance in Kathmandu, Nepal, to help create a wheelchair repair center. Eric is also the author of Canyon of Hope, From Darkness to Dawn, Embracing the Light Within, where he shares his inspiring journey of overcoming adversity and discovering hope. Through his advocacy and storytelling, Eric empowers others to rise above life's toughest challenges, proving that even in the darkest moments, there's a way forward. Welcome, Eric. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on here. I am going to let you start wherever you feel like starting in your story. You have quite the journey to share, and I think it'll be really interesting for everybody to hear. And hopefully, some people listening that maybe have dealt with similar things will find some comfort in it. So, why don't you go ahead and start wherever?
Okay. I guess I could start in the beginning of what brought me to where I am today. So I was 26 years old. I was working for a radio station doing advertising and marketing, and I didn't feel very fulfilled in my life. There was just this, I was in my 20s. I was going from one party to the next, and it just didn't feel fulfilling anymore. And so I was at the recruiter station for a sales call, and I'm 26. We're in the middle of two wars. I'm in good shape. I'm like, why aren't they trying to recruit me? So throughout this whole process, they didn't try to recruit me at all. And I went out to my car, and then I went back in and I was like, hey, why didn't you try to recruit me? And they were like, why would we? You're older and you're in a good job. You've got a good job. You're just not the target person that would think that would be interested. And
I have
at
heard
the
that a
time I
lot,
was in,
actually. They like to go for the like 18, 19-year-olds mostly, right?
yeah, and you're typically not somebody who is in a career path, right? So I
Right.
was in a career path that, matter of fact, at the time I was interviewing for a job in Chicago for Southeastern Regional Sales Manager. And who knows if I would have gotten it or not, but it was coming back from that job from the first interview. And I know I got passed on to the second one, but it was coming back from the first one that I was sitting in traffic and I was realizing that if I got this job, the questions that I had about whether I could hack it in the military and whether I could make it and all of the other things that had been swirling around since I was 18, because I had gone to join a number of times and my dad had talked me out of it each time. He was a ranger in Vietnam. And it was my logic, it was my reasoning for why I wanted to go in. So that's why he talked me out of it. So long story, getting down to the nuts and bolts, I decided that was my opportunity if I wanted to take it to go an entirely different route. So at 26 years old, I joined the military and headed off to basic training and infantryman school, and then from there airborne. And it was flying from Georgia, Fort Benning, Georgia, to Alaska, where I met my wife. She was flying for the government, and we were both in the cheap seats. And so they sat us next to each other, and it was an 8-hour flight from Atlanta to Anchorage. We often talk about that being our first date day. We had a chicken dinner, and this is back in the day when they still had the movie screens up in the planes,
Oh
and we
yeah.
watched it all together. And so we watched the movie Hitch, and it was literally like the perfect first date that I didn't have to pay for. And then we got to Alaska. I moved into base about 9 months after we met on the plane. We got married.
Oh wow,
Um,
quick.
yeah, I knew we were both older when we saw each other. When we first met, we were both ready for something serious. And that was God's first big blessing to me, was finding her. And so find ourselves in March getting married, and then really quick after we got married, we got pregnant with our first son, David. And I'm now at this point assigned to the Scout Sniper Platoon as a RTO, and we're getting ready to go to war. And so by the time we deployed for war in October of 2006, Jen, my wife, was about 7.5 months pregnant. And so when we said our goodbyes, I expected to come home in a few months for the birth and then stick around for a few weeks and then go back. And by the time that I landed in Kuwait and made my way to Camp Buring, which is where you stage before you go into Iraq, when I got there, there was a NCO waiting for me at the bus and told me that I had a Red Cross message. We had lost our son, David. So because of some amazing leadership, I was able to get right back on a plane and get back home in time to be there for the stillbirth.
Oh
And
my
then
gosh.
we buried our son at Fort Richardson National Cemetery. And then the army and that same amazing leadership was like, Eric, you don't have to come to war. Like, you guys are freshly married, you're newlyweds, you can stay back on Rear D. And I was like, yeah, please don't make me stay. I'm Irish Catholic. When anything happens in life that's bad, all I know is anger. If you're really wanting me to do, it's better for me to go back. And so I pretended in my head and around that like my job was important and I needed to go back because
Mm.
that's what I'd been training for. But really, what it was that I just wasn't emotionally able to be there for my wife at that time. It was
Ugh.
easier to go to war and have people shooting at me than it was to be there and be emotionally present and connected for what my wife needed as she dealt with the
I
loss.
can't
So
even imagine. That's just got to be devastating.
and so that was, yeah, it was the roughest thing I think I've ever had to go through in my life. And I talk about this in my book is, Jen didn't try to talk me out of it at all. She supported it. She
Mm.
knew what she got into when she married me. And she was like, no, I understand. I didn't tell her it was because I was feeling like I was inept. I was just like, we've been training. The
Did
guys
you
need
know you
me.
felt that way at the time, though? Or is this something you recognized later?
No, I knew.
You did. Okay.
Yeah. There are just things like I knew that the mindset that I had been in and the mindset that we had been training to go to war, emotionally, I wasn't available.
Mm.
And I knew that at that time. I also knew that I would end up having to go back in 6 months. And that would mean that I would be in a new platoon with new guys, and I hadn't trained with any of them. And so there were a few other dynamics to it that made more part of it. But overall, it was me running away from the emotional pain. And then by the time I made it to Iraq and got linked back up with my platoon, that very first night I was on my first night mission, I got blown up for my first time.
You what?
I got blown up for my first time.
As you went back?
Yeah, the very first night I was out, I got blown up.
Oh my gosh, you're that's just like
So
a
I
really
no,
rough
and because like
place
my
to have
there was
been.
the yeah, it was luckily whoever buried the bomb buried it so deep in the ground that the ground took up most of the
Okay.
blast. So it was by far the weakest bomb. We were still able to easily get the truck back to the base or the Humvee. And then that just set the tone for how life in Iraq would be, which was just our brigade and our battalion was a high tempo brigade and battalion. And so by the time Christmas came around, we had found out that we were going to be getting sent to Camp Fallujah to be attached to the Marines because even the Marines need heroes. And we went up to a place called Karma, Iraq. And at that time, it was just an Al Qaeda stronghold. And
Mm.
so it was just a relentless pace of nonstop missions.
Yeah.
And
Very
throughout the
easy to
course
take your
of
mind off of everything else.
yeah, it was easy, right? Like
Yeah.
it was harder for Jen. When I left, I didn't know whether I'd come home and we would be able to be together. That was a legitimate concern that I had. But I think in the end, because my wife is such an amazing person, and because we were so honest about our jobs and where we were and what was important to us at the time, we didn't have kids and these sort of things and these commitments, when you make them to serve, that comes first. I hate to say that. People in the civilian world don't really understand when you raise your right hand, you're not just raising it to say, oh, I'm willing to go and die for our country. It's for the next 5 years, 4 years, whatever it is, I'm willing to do whatever you need me to do. So if you now need me to move from Alaska to here to do this, I don't have any say in that. I mean, I got to go and I got to go. And so there was just a very strong commitment to that service. And I look back now and I wish I would have taken the 6 months
Mm.
because what it did and what it taught us to do in our marriages was that when anything big happened, we go process on our own.
Okay.
And then once we've processed on our own, then we come together and we try to meld those two processes
Mhm.
together,
Yeah.
which sometimes works really well and sometimes doesn't.
Yeah.
And so now we're approaching our 19th
Oh,
anniversary, and that
congrats.
is a a huge aspect of where we're trying to focus time now on is retraining ourselves that we can process these things together. And that, I think, in writing the book was something that I was able to recognize because I wrote the book and looking back and that sort
And
of
just being in I think a military relationship, at least what I can see from the outside looking in, like you guys are living separate lives a lot of the time. So I would think in a lot of aspects, every time you come together is an adjustment every single time.
yeah, it was. So yeah.
When you would go away and then come back and then go away and come
Yeah.
back and all that, there's
Yes. And
always
sometimes it was for 2 weeks, sometimes it was for a month, it wasn't always for 15 months. But then there's the other side to the coin too, which is that she has her job, which is something that she values in her service and what she has in moving forward. And at the time, that job for her took her around a lot too. So
yeah.
it wasn't just me traveling,
No,
sometimes it
sure.
was her too. And I think the hardest one was the coming home. And I think that one was because if you would, and I don't ever want to put words in my wife's mouth, but I'm pretty safe to say this one because I've heard her say it a number of times that when I came home from R&R, she had seen that light that she had fallen in love with in my eyes, that had gone dark and
Oh,
my eyes just looked dark.
oh,
And coming home, I didn't have that spark. It was because R&R was after the second explosion. And then by the time I came home, I had lived through a Katyusha rocket attack. and then another EFP, which is another type of roadside bomb that's meant to go through like 10 inches of armor.
Oh,
So
wow.
it was that one was just massive. And so the fact that I was even still here was a testament to God, honestly, is what I've come to learn in my journey. But at the time, I was still like, oh, I'm good. I'm good. I'm
Sure.
seeing purple flares and all kinds of stuff that doesn't, I'm good. We're good. Let's keep rolling.
Mm,
And I'm not unique in that way.
mm,
Anybody who is in the military, infantry, they're all that way.
yeah.
When you're out in a wartime situation, if they're doing it in a peacetime situation, they're an idiot. You get hurt in a peacetime situation, go get some help.
Yeah.
Like totally different scenario.
Yeah.
But if you're in a war, you're the people at that moment in time to your right and left are the ones who matter the most to you.
Yeah.
And you pulling off is I'm not going to be there to help. And as stupid as that sounds, you go to the doc and if he's, oh, you're good, man. You're like, okay, good to
Mm,
go. Take this, you'll be fine. Good. Let's go. Let's keep going. So by the end of deployment, that was when I realized for me, things weren't right, but I didn't say anything because I had plans of where I wanted to keep trying to climb in the military. My wife saw it when I came home. And then eventually the Army did too. And you go through what's called a post health assessment. And I scored off the charts for post traumatic stress disorder and for traumatic brain
oh,
injury and
wow.
a whole host of other musculoskeletal issues. The bad thing about joining when you're 26 is that you're 26. Your body is 26.
Yeah.
You're doing things that your 18-year-old body would have bounced back from, but your 26-year-old body's whoa. And then by the time you're 20 years into it,
Right.
you're in your 38, 40. If you that's why you can retire if you're at 20 years, because by putting your body through the infantry for 20 years, those guys are the silent heroes of my world. Is for 20 years, the amount of abuse that they put their body through day in and day out in the name of this country is huge. So, anyways, eventually I get told I can either go finance or I got to be retired. I get retired. And
How was that too? Because I had an interview on here with a guy that will have come out before this episode that he actually helps. He was forced to retire and he helps people reintegrate back. Was that really hard when that was not what you wanted and that wasn't your choice? It was a forced situation.
so on the outward aspect, I was acting like, oh, it's no big deal. On
Yeah.
the inside, I was freaking out because I'm like,
Yeah.
I got a family, I've got a wife, I've got a mortgage, I've got bills. What is the military retirement? That's not a ton of money. But on the outside, I'm like, oh, yeah, because I saw it as weakness if I let in any fear or any of that kind of thing outward. And the way it manifested was anger and
Uh,
grumpiness. I think once I got out, the first few years, I just floated around and I was a little lost. I spent a lot of time in the mountains in Alaska, hiking and camping. And during that time frame, which was supposed to be I'm retired now and no more life hits, during that time frame we had two more miscarriages.
oh
We found out my wife had a rare form of breast cancer
oh
that
my
we
God.
had to go out of state in Alaska. We had to regularly travel to Cedar Sinai. And I had taken a job as a probation officer with the state of Alaska, and then all of this happened. And in the beginning, I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. My wife would say I saw it the day he came home. And then it was during the cancer and the trying to figure out work and having just being new to the job, I didn't have the ability to have a ton of leave. So I would be taking a position that I would need to do leave without pay, and they needed somebody to fill the position. So ultimately, I resigned my position that I fought to get and to be
Mhm.
able to make sure I could travel and take care of Jen in the way that she needed to take care of. And truthfully, the I worked in a jail as a probation officer, and I learned in that process, I'm not the recycler, I'm the garbage man. I don't put people back out. I'm more of the guy to throw them away,
Uh,
not to put them back out. That was hard because you have to let out people who probably shouldn't get let out
mm,
because their time is up or whatever the case may be.
yeah.
That was a really hard job for me. I didn't like it. So it was easy to say to let it go, but at the same time, it's just all these things are swirling around. And I reached out to my doctor, and that was the first time I was like, hey, I think I'm having a little bit of trouble, anxiety, handling all everything that's going on. And so for a short period of time, they put me on Xanax, which just really made me sleep. It didn't really help with the anxiety, and I didn't really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's you're not living life. I'm the guy that always is on the go, and so that didn't really fit. And then eventually, we ended up out in DC where my wife had taken a promotion, and I was doing advocacy work out there. And that was when the realization that I have PTSD actually came into play
Mm,
because you can't hide from the people, the scenarios, the chaos of what DC is. And my head and mind was in such a security mindset that like I couldn't process when I was out there.
mm,
And in the process of being out there, we got pregnant for the fourth time with our daughter Kaylee, and we had a scare while we were out there, and we were away from the OBGYN we've always used in Alaska. And so at the end of it, we ended up moving back to Alaska. Our house hadn't sold. And so we were like, we're gonna move home. We've got our daughter on the way. And I had made some changes at the last minute where I was like, I'm gonna stop drinking. I'm gonna do all of these different things because I'm gonna be the stay-at-home dad. And
okay.
so there's big changes on the way, and we move home. And so that was a new chapter. And it was also a selfish chapter of my life because I didn't realize how much my wife was giving up, nor did I give her the emotional support she needed. And even realizing what she was giving up in order to accommodate our family. It wasn't
Yeah.
just me. It was also about where do we want to bring our kids into the world? Where do we want family around? Things along those
Yeah.
lines. But I totally missed it. And she went back into her work, and I went into parenting, which was way more stressful than what I thought I was going to be with PTSD and like all kinds of other issues.
Yeah.
And long story short, I think we spent a few years just treading water, and
Mm,
then we ended up getting transferred to Indiana, where we are now, which is
okay.
where I was born and raised from.
Okay.
And so my family is here, and I should have been super excited, but I wasn't. And it because I hadn't been in a good place. And
Yeah.
I hadn't been, while I had been trying to deal with my issues, I didn't realize I was dealing with the wrong issue.
And how
Um,
long was this now that you moved to Indiana from the time you retired from the military?
so I was put on retirement or the TDRL, temporary retirement list, in 2009, February of 2009. And by the time we get to Indiana, it was June of 2015.
Okay.
So 6 years of just ups and downs, a lot more downs than ups. And by the time we got to Indiana, I think my wife had gotten to a point where she just didn't see any hope that things were going to get any better. And
Mm.
I certainly didn't, even though I was doing the work and showing up. And so I found one day I picked up the iPad and I saw that she had been researching divorce attorneys.
Oh,
And what I had learned in that, because she left the page up. And so when you're not talking about it, sometimes in marriages that'll get thrown out in arguments
yeah.
or stuff like that. And it shouldn't. I'm guilty of doing it. And I try my best to never, ever do that. But I've been guilty of it in the past. But when you're doing the research and you're not talking about it, that means it's real.
Yeah.
And so you would think that was when it was like, okay, I need to get into high gear. I need to figure out my stuff. But it was actually the exact opposite. Because of where I was, because of all of that darkness and not dealing with stuff and just putting them in the jar and putting the lid on and that kind of processing, I had just gotten into my head that everybody would be better off without me. She's looking at divorce. My kids, even though I'm the one that's a stay-at-home dad, they're not like, I'm not their favorite. I should be their favorite, but I'm not their favorite. And that bothered me. And so I'm like feeling just like a failure all the way around. And I've done doing the work for PTSD and all of this stuff, and it's not getting better. And so that December of 2015, I found myself sitting at a kitchen table that I had literally built trying to end my life. And it was by the grace of God, and I totally believe that today, that I am still here. And it was not wanting to fail and picking up my kids when my gun wouldn't fire, no matter how many times I tried, that saved me. 2 days after that attempt, I had shelved it. I was like, okay, I'm going to shelve it for right now.
Nobody
I'll
found
come.
you, nobody caught you, nobody
Right.
like you just made the choice to yeah.
So all day I had been trying, and I would clear my gun. I would take it apart, look at the trigger assembly, trying to figure out why the trigger's not squeezing. And I'd put it back together. I'd dry fire. It would fire just fine. I'd load around in the chamber, and no matter how hard I tried to squeeze that trigger, it wouldn't squeeze. Now, I'll say that I've been told in the past, you just really weren't trying to squeeze that trigger. But no, literally, and none of this sounds crazy, but you'll hear for real, veterans are like that sometimes. And I'm like, okay, I have less than a pound of pressure on my trigger squeeze, so it should have just gone. You don't really have to squeeze my trigger at all. It just nice tap and it's done. And so I was like, I told him, I went into more details about it. I'm like, so it should have gone. I'm like, and it didn't. And I went through that routine a number of times to the point where I looked at the stove clock and I realized it was time for me to leave to go pick up my kids from daycare. And I felt like, all right, I failed at this too. I can't fail at that. At least I know I can't fail at picking up my kids. And so I went and I picked them up and I brought them home. I didn't tell anyone. 2 days later, my very first platoon sergeant, I found out that he had taken his own life. So he was number 13 for me.
Oh, wow.
And I was angry and I was mad and really frustrated. And then the irony hit me like just a ton of bricks that I was about to do and cause all of these same feelings for the people that I loved.
Oh, wow.
And so I was watching Rocky. It was late. I couldn't sleep on TBS. And it's the where he's yelling at his kid in front of the restaurant. He's life ain't about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and get up and keep moving forward. I had realized in that moment that I had just stopped getting back up in life.
Oh,
Somewhere along the way, all these hits, I was like, screw it. I'll just lay here. And that's when I called my best friend Brent. He was still in Alaska. So the time difference, I knew he'd be up. And he answered the phone some crazy way, something like Billy Bob's Backwoods Barbecue and Grill. Would you like your squirrel well done or medium? Some just craziness. And there was just silent. I just started crying. I'm like, I tried to eat my Glock 2 days ago, Brent. I don't want to die. And there literally was just this silence and seemed like a really long time. And then I got you, man. We got you. I got you. So let's talk about this. And he must have spent probably 2, 3 hours on the phone with me that night. And we crafted a plan. I made him promise that he wouldn't tell Jen because I knew that if he told Jen, Jen would make me go to the VA hospital. And I'm not saying this is for everyone out there. I'm just saying for me in that scenario and in that situation, that would have been the wrong place for me to go. And he and I talked about that and why that would have been. And so there were a whole slew of guardrails that were put in place. And if I didn't follow those guardrails than he would tell Jen.
Okay.
And that led me to applying for a program called No Barriers Warriors out of Fort Collins, Colorado.
Oh, hey.
Um, and it was founded by the first blind man to ever climb Mount Everest, which his name is Eric Wymer. He lives in Golden, Colorado. And in the program that I had applied for, it was over the climbing season. So you do 3 successive climbs over the climbing season. And the first one was supposed to be in the Wind River Range, but it didn't work out. The snow avalanche danger was high. So No Barriers pivoted and they were like, we're going to do it in the Gila National Wilderness down in New Mexico. And I was like, yeah, I've had enough with deserts. I'm not going.
Fair. Very fair.
And my wife said, if you don't go, it's highly likely we're going to end up divorced. It's up to you. I'm not going to force you to go, but I need to see that you're going to start trying. And at this point, I had never been away from the kids. The kids had always I hadn't been away from the family to miss them or to even realize how lucky I was to have them. And so it was that the idea of losing them is what drove me on that trip. And it was that trip where I was captured the photograph that's on the top of my book. So my background, photography has always been an escape of mine since I was 19 when I first took my first photography class in college. And ever since then, it's been a passion of mine. Ansel Adams is a huge admirer of his work. And so I'm a landscape photographer. And so this trip just put me in a place where I was like, okay, I can get back to some passions that I have. And then we get to the desert and we get into the West Gila, and it had been hit by a fire and a flood in the years before we showed up. So there's these things called alligator trees. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they have this tough bark on the outside of them that looks like alligator skin. That's why they're called alligator trees. And that's to protect them in the fire. So this huge fire comes rolling through, and as you can see, this whole area has all been charred and damaged. And then you've got a flood that went through, so you've got debris that's been spread everywhere. And I'm like, oh my God, this landscape just mimics how I look and feel on the inside. And then we get down into this canyon where we'll be walking for 5 days along the West Fork Gila River. And in the canyon, you were always in the shadows, in the darkness. But at the end of the canyon where we were walking, there was always light. And so for me, it was like, okay, I haven't seen light in my own life in so long. I'm going to try to do my best to get one image from this trip that I can hang up in my house, and that no matter how dark it gets, it will always remind me that there's light at the end if you just keep moving forward. And it was during that trip that I also began to realize and process a lot of conversations that I had years earlier. And I don't know why they had come into my mind. Maybe it was reading the post that my wife had given me from Jesus Calling, or the different things that I was just doing for myself while I was on this trip. But what I had realized is that I had fundamentally lost my faith in pretty much everything. And that's what war will do to you. So I used to explain wars to people when they asked when I first came home, as the Seinfeld episode of The Bubble Boy. I don't know if you're a Seinfeld fan, but back in the day, there was an episode where there's this boy in the bubble, and I equated life to being like that when you're born into this bubble of innocence, right? And then as things happen, boys break your heart or girls break your heart or whatever it is, little pinpricks come and they let out air from that innocence of that bubble. But then eventually something traumatic comes and rips that bubble wide open, and then there's no innocence left. You just see what humanity will do to one another. And in the name of something, and it can be horrific. And so in that process, it's really hard to, where do you find that faith, right? So then it was like, okay, all these years, my wife is trying to get me to church, and I realized I'm angry with God. I grew up Catholic, and the way that the Catholics, or the way I was believed, if you're good and you're this and that, God will be good to you and he'll take care of you. No one ever told me that sometimes being one of God's soldiers means you're going to have to walk a whole lot of tough battles that isn't going to be good, and it
Yeah.
may not end up in riches here on this place, right? And so I was never prepared for that type of journey.
Mm.
And so I became angry. I became angry after David. And
Yeah.
on this trip that I had my Lieutenant Dan moment. And I from Forrest Gump. And I were just, me and God had it out. And he pointed out to me along the way in this conversation and this having it out moment that he was with me the whole time.
Mm.
And then the things that I was reading were coupling, had just reinforced that same message. And so on the way out, I was like, what if it isn't innocence? What if it's faith? What if we're born into this bubble of faith?
Yeah.
And because babies aren't mean, babies don't hate, kids don't hate.
Yeah.
You look at how things go. And so, what if this is all because I've lost my ability to have faith in something?
Yeah.
So, at that point, I wasn't ready to have faith in God. We were just starting, we were just getting reacquainted, but I knew I could have faith in my wife's faith.
Mm.
So, that was the fertilizer. That was the things that allowed me to start to cultivate the seeds that God had put in me all those years ago.
Wow. So what did you do when you got back from that trip? That's a lot of epiphanies to have.
So I packaged a lot of that season up
Okay.
in that trip, but I started on a road, and I was committed to figuring that faith piece out.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What do I believe? And who do I believe in? And how do I repair the bridges that aren't burned, but that are damaged from the years and years of me not having a broader view of what my trying to control the situations in every scenario because of the fear. That's really what it comes down to, the fear that you're not going to be able to protect or control an outcome of a situation. And that was a big component of what I had. So those became my focus in those years. And in the beginning, I'm going to be honest, like I was like, I got 6 months under my belt. I'm doing good. You haven't changed. You haven't forgiven me yet. What's going on? These bridges, I'm working on them daily. Why aren't we getting better? And for anyone out there who's listening that may be in the same position as I was then, you don't get to dictate that time frame.
The people around you do.
They do. What
Mm.
you do is you get to dictate how they color you.
Okay.
I can understand you feeling that way. And in the past, I didn't show up in the ways that you need.
Mm.
But I'm trying now. I'm sorry for those times. I can't change the past,
Yeah.
but I am trying now, and I'm showing up daily now. And at some point, I hope you'll see that. And if you do, I hope that our relationship will grow and get better. And if not, I'm still going to show up. No matter how hard you push me away, I'm still going to show up even more. And I think for me, it was just the anger, the yelling. There was no physical, there's no this. It was the being surprised or the not being able to control the outcome. And out of that fear, no, don't do that. And that, yeah, a 3-year-old, they're like, what do you mean? They want to be able to jump off the couch and fall. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, you can hit your head and die. And so it was never about taking something or being mean to them. It was about controlling their behavior. And
Mm.
that in itself still has a whole host of issues that if you don't account for will cause them to have harm down the line
Mm.
when they're adults, because you're giving them the wrong ingredients on how to build their own foundation. And so it's been a lot of humbling up. And
I think we
that's
all really struggle with control. I think we all want to have control over so many situations, and that's why a lot of them are so traumatic. And because we don't, there's so much we don't have control over, and we just have to trust and roll with. And
and that's hard.
it's so hard.
Like I'm not, I just had an experience like this past week where I heard whenever I'm like trying to process something in my path with God, like he throws verses or things into my life, and like it's a constant. And so the one for this one was slow to anger, right? Jesus talks about being slow to anger.
Ooh,
And
very quick to anger
and
in the right moment.
right. And so I'm like, so this past week I've had some things with my HOA that and and I really tried to be slow with anger, right, in the process of this until I get a notice from them that I have an unapproved improvement on my lot and I need to bring it down. It's my fence that the builder put up. I fake boxwood on the fence so that my neighbors wouldn't have to look at my trash cans.
You're like, all right, everybody gets to look at my trash cans then.
I'm like, you know what? No, this is where I go this slow to anger, right? So I'm like, can you show me in the CCRs where it says I can't have these things? Can you show me in the CCRs where it says that I need to ask for permission to do what I did? Can you show me in the CCRs where it dictates and talks about what you can and cannot have for a trash screen? And they're like, whoa. And I'm a real estate broker and I've gone through all of these property management classes and they're trying, well, under it. And I'm like, nope, trash can screen is not listed. And while that
It
may
will
be
be
your
now.
interpretation, the reality is when we go to court, it is about what is the language, not what your interpretation of the
Yeah.
language is. So I'll see you in mediation. Now
Mm.
it will take me less than 20 minutes to take it down.
Yeah.
I got nothing else to do. But it's the premise of it, right? It was like, come on now. I can't, and here's what it is. They want everyone to keep the trash cans in their garage.
Mm.
And and I hate that I even had to say this out loud, but because of some disabilities that I have from my injuries from service, my trash cans are located in an area that makes it easy for me to take them in and out
Yeah.
and manage that. And so I did everything I could to manage that little situation, to follow the rules, to do all of this, to only come in and for them to say that doesn't matter because you should have them in the trash. And I was like, can you please show me in the CCRs where it says it needs to be in the garage?
Yeah.
And they're like, it doesn't. And I feel I've been a little down on myself because I'm like, all right, I didn't handle it as calmly as I would have liked to handle that conversation.
We're
Bad
not
for it.
perfect. That all takes practice, right?
And I've always repented, like I will always repent to God for those things. And I know that at some point he'll want me to repent to that individual. But at this particular point in time, I just can't because he's not right. And
Yeah.
so when we acknowledge that we've overstepped, then I will repent for the being too fast to anger.
We're human. We're gonna make those mistakes. It doesn't matter how hard, how much work we've done on ourselves. You're gonna revert back to some of that every once in a while. And then, like you said, you just repent, ask for forgiveness, and learn from it to try to do
It's
better the next time.
yeah, no. It's one of those things that everybody who's listening who has had to have an HOA has had some of those people who have run HOAs. And it's,
Yeah.
come on,
I
you
purposely
know,
live in a neighborhood that does not have that,
like
which
that's, I'm
has
like,
its
now
downsides too.
No, yes, that's what we're at this point. It's yeah. My time in this home is limited, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to get to a place where I don't have to worry about what other people have to say about my house.
Yeah.
And it's not because I'm a hoarder. It is not because not willing to keep the CCRs. It's just because when I want to do something for my house, I
That you
don't
own.
want to ask somebody else's permission to do something on a house I pay for.
I feel you on that. But there are very few neighborhoods, at least in Colorado right now, that have no HOAs. So,
Yeah, and I get it. I do because I lived in Alaska and you can get individuals who, if you have land, a little bit of land, to store a whole lot of stuff.
yeah.
And so I get both sides of it
Yeah.
where you're at. We're a little over the top where I'm at. There aren't neighborhoods that don't have HOAs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you have to live like in the city or
Yep.
out in the country. And I'm like, yeah, it's time to get back out in the
Yeah.
country.
That was a fun tangent. I want to back up a little bit because we still haven't gotten to your story about Nepal. So tell me about
Yeah.
that.
So Nepal is from when I was 19 years old, I had a dream to go to Nepal and photograph
Mm.
Mount Everest and the Himalayas. And I always knew if I was going to need to do it, it's going to be because I got hired or somebody is paying me to go do
Okay.
it. And so, in the process of linking up with No Barriers and getting through that entire climbing season in 2017, I still stayed connected with them and I did a lot of speaking engagements and fundraising engagements with them. And in the process of that, I met Heather Thompson of the Real Housewives of New York.
Okay.
And she was putting together a trip to go to Nepal to hike Mira Peak and do some philanthropic work while she was over in Nepal. And she asked me she knew that I had always wanted to do this. And so she hired me to be one of the photographers on this trip,
Amazing.
which just blew me away because she's got the pick of whoever she wants, right? You're
Yeah.
not really going to have a hard time finding someone to come photograph you and do videography. And so in doing that, I was really excited and focused on that sort of thing. And at the same time, I was just starting in public speaking and branching off on my own. And I had a big speech that I was about to give where I would be talking about what I'm about to go do and all this sort of stuff. And so wheelchairs were never a part of the plan with
Okay.
that. About 6 hours before I was to leave to go on this speech, I got a phone call that my best friend Brent had taken his own life.
Oh,
And I had just seen him 3 weeks before that, and I missed everything. I don't know if it's because I was just being too self-absorbed in myself, or he was doing a better job than hiding it, or if it was just maybe a combination of the two. But I didn't see it. I didn't see it coming at
so
all.
sorry.
And so I just started spiraling, and I'm thinking in my head, if the guy who helped save me can't make it himself, and by this
Mm.
point he was number 19 for me,
Oh man.
how am I going to make it? And I really just started spiraling down. And then I remembered something Eric Weimer had been telling me for the last year and a half, 2 years, which was when adversity strikes us, Eric, and all that negative energy is swirling around in our lives and we don't know what to do with it. You take all of that negative energy and you funnel it into doing something good for someone else. And when you do, that'll quiet down your own pond. And in time, when you think about it, what you'll think about is that act of goodness,
Mm.
what you're struggling with. And I didn't know what I would do at the time or any of that, but I made a conscious effort to reach. And instead of getting angry with God and instead of getting angry with all of that, I just reached and grabbed before I could fall all the way back down
Mhm.
mentally. And taking that theory to heart, I knew we would be spending 2 days at the Center for Disabled Children's Assistance in Kathmandu, Nepal. And so I was talking to him about the videography and what they would be comfortable with, what I'm comfortable with, what Heather's comfortable with, because no one is doing it to exploit the kids. You're just doing it, A, to document it for her, so she has it for herself. But in the future, if she needed to, she would have some B-roll that she could use.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what can I do to help you guys? And for me, I was thinking, I've got all these little kids' clothes, I've got toys, just bring all this stuff with me. And he told me he needed 8 wheelchairs, and I had no idea anything about wheelchairs. I'm like, if I bring the money, can we get them there? And he's, no, they don't sell kids' wheelchairs in Nepal. You can't even really buy adult wheelchairs in Nepal. And I was like, all right, I don't know anything about wheelchairs. So I just hedged. I went downstairs. I talked to Jen, and she's, I don't know, Eric, you're just starting to rebound from the health struggles that you have. And then you've got this thing with Brent, and that took its toll. And you've got your photography, and you're trying to get all set up for that. Maybe now's not the right time to take on this project. Maybe you go meet them and then you take this project on after the fact. And I said, but aren't you the one who always tells me when we feel called that we're supposed to answer? And she's, yeah. And I'm like, all right. So I went back and I messaged Dende that I'd bring the wheelchairs. And I had no idea what I would do. My first call was to Heather. And I was like, hey, I know you're going to think this is crazy. She said, I don't. Whatever you need, I've got you. And she's, but this is your project. Okay. And then I called Eric Weimer because I didn't have a nonprofit to run donations through.
Yeah.
So you got to accept donations. And long story short, they all came together, and I met a group called Rock Warriors out of Montana, and they allowed me to fundraise the money through them. I was able to raise like 7,300 of the 11,000 we needed, and I was going to run out of time. And then Heather and her crew made up the rest because
Wow.
yeah, like really, she's a phenomenal person. And then I still didn't have a plan to get these wheelchairs there, but we had managed to secure a wheelchair fitter and a wheelchair engineer that would teach them how to repair them and all of this sort of stuff.
Wow.
So we were setting up like a clinic so that they could then get taught to create a wheelchair repair center for themselves. And that goes in line to with what my business is, which is my business's name is Hand Up, and our slogan is two are better than one. If one falls, the other is there to give a hand up. And so this is not about like me getting in and saying I want a wheelchair repair center. This was just about me helping them start theirs. And long story short, I never made it to the Himalayas. We got to Nepal. I built the 8 wheelchairs, and in the process of being there for the first 72 hours, I got an antibiotic resistant form of salmonella, and I almost died in Nepal.
Oh my gosh.
I flew home with 104-degree fever. And so then by the time I got home, my wife met me at the hospital or at the airport. She drove me home to our house in Indiana, and then we went to the hospital. I spent 8 days in the hospital.
Oh my gosh.
But in the process of this whole time, I've got a smile on my face. And the reason I had my smile on my face is because I had done it, and I had done it through faith. I had no idea how I was going to get the funding for the wheelchairs. I had no idea how I was going to get these wheelchairs. Most of these kids had cerebral palsy, so these were really complicated wheelchairs
Yeah.
to build and get over there. And I've got nothing, no ability, and I really didn't even have the money to fund it. So it was just like everything was taken on faith. And here I am. And I really thought it would be the kids that I would find the most like joy in. And it
Yeah.
was the parents.
Oh.
And it was especially the moms. Like one mom, her daughter was 9 and she had cerebral palsy. And so she had to carry her on her back everywhere she went. because it's a third world country. There's nowhere to clean to put your kid down when you're
Mm.
out and about. And so for her to be able to, at this point, the child has grown so much that carrying your child on your back at this, it's a burden. To be able to get the wheelchair now allowed a safe place for her child, but also an ability for her to interact with her kid in a way that was better for her.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect that.
Mm.
So in the process of all of this, over the next few months, over me healing, I stayed following the center and their journey, and they were scouring landfills and all of this. Long story short, we ended up partnering up with the Wheelchair Foundation. I did, and I did the first two try containers. The Wheelchair Foundation helped me. They had matching funds. And I think the second one, I needed a little bit more help than I did on the first one, but it was in essence raising $42,000. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
not an easy amount of money to
Yes.
raise. And more than I cared to admit came out of my business's pocket when it didn't have money to come out of it. And
Mm.
so it was just, but I knew if I could do enough of them and I could prove to the Wheelchair Foundation that they were legit and they could handle this, that they could then become that center. And so now if wheelchairs from the Wheelchair Foundation go to Nepal, they're only going to the CDC.
Amazing.
CDCA, unless somebody specifically wants them to go somewhere else.
Okay.
But that is their go-to because they know that they will arrive. There's always the danger that they're gonna go missing during shipment because that's worth a lot of money on the black market. I know that sounds crazy to say, but it's worth a lot of money. And so we started with 8, and it's now well over 1,000 wheelchairs since 2018.
Dang. That's an amazing thing that you did. I admire you so much.
Yes, it's been that's been the belief that lets me know, okay, instead of getting mad and angry, if you're having a bad day, if you lean into doing something for someone else,
Yeah.
just something as nice as I'm going to buy that person's coffee behind
Mm.
me.
Yeah.
You never know what's going on with that person around you. It's like I tell my kids are well, big graphic novel fans, starting to move into more chapter books now. What's cool about that is they've got the bubbles over the head, right? And
Yeah.
so what I explain to my kids about everyone else in our world is that think of people like graphic novels with a bubble over their head. And the only way that bubble gets filled is if you ask questions.
Oh.
Don't fill the bubble with your assumptions. Always ask
Mm.
questions.
I
Kind
love
of goes
that.
back to the Ted Lasso, be curious. Like we're not curious enough about the people around us. And we are all slightly become narcissists in the sense that once somebody is being, we perceive them as being judgmental or mean towards us. Like you go to a store and you ask somebody a question and they're real short with you and you take it personally. We all do that. I'm guilty of it.
Yeah.
And I try not to. We should be asking the questions, is everything okay?
Yeah.
Because for all we know, they're in the middle of a divorce. They just lost their mom. Their kid could be sick with cancer. They could be getting evicted from their home. We have no idea as individuals what's going on in that person's world. And instead of taking it as they're attacking you, so you attack back and then add more darkness to their world, the better aspect would be to, is everything okay? And I'm not perfect at this. It's easier said than done.
Sure.
I just want to be clear for the audience. I am not a perfect person, but it is something that I try to do when I find myself in those situations.
We
If
definitely
anything,
need to have more compassion for each other.
yes. If anything, just as a better, as a good example for my kids, because they're always watching.
Life is hard. I very much believe we all have our shit. Everybody's going through something difficult and or has gone through something difficult, and everybody's just trying to do the best they can with their lives. Yeah, there's usually something under there going on that has nothing to do with you in the moment.
And I'm a firm believer in that same same scenario as what everybody's had and gone through something. And everybody's story is just as important as mine. And
Yes.
a lot of the stories that I hear from people, I'm like their story and to me is just like they're a hero to me when I hear their story. And I'm like, you really should decide to share about this.
Yes.
And I try to encourage people to share about those struggles because the reality is it's in sharing that we find that compassion
Yeah.
and empathy because we're reminded that we were there once ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just brings people realize they're not alone too.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think we live in a society where we're becoming more and more isolating in ourselves. We're not living in communities like we used to as much. And then you just feel like you're the only one struggling with this one thing. And I've been in those moments myself. I just felt I'm like, no one understands. No one out there is going through the same thing. I'm the only one that's going through this. And the reality is, it's not true. I'm the only one living my story. So everybody's story is slightly different, but
Yes.
those struggles are still there. The emotions are still there. The feelings are still there. And we need to lean on each other more, I think.
David Goggins. Have you ever heard of, do you know who
Yeah.
David
Yeah.
Goggins? Okay. So David Goggins always talks about everybody's got shit. Some of us just hide it better than others.
Yes.
And some of us just don't care to hide it at all
Yeah.
anymore because we just get done playing the game. And
Yeah.
so that's literally, for me, the book, all of the, you reach that point where you realize that the being able to reach out and make an impact positively in other people's lives matters more to me than what other people might say about what I share.
Yeah.
And whether they like it or whether they think whatever they have to say about it. I just, at this point, I judge it by do I feel like I'm walking in the calling that God is wanting me to? And am I right with the people that, He wants me to be right with? My wife and my two kids and the
You're living
people
your
that,
truth.
and as long as I'm doing those things, then I'm done.
I'm currently reading The Let Them Theory. Have you heard of that book by Mel
I
Robbins?
somebody brought that up to me. Another podcaster brought that up to him. I'm trying to think, and I think she's from Colorado, if I remember
Oh,
correctly. But no, I haven't read it. This was like 2 weeks ago.
it's pretty new. I think it came out in December or January, but I'm currently on the chapter that's talking about not caring what others think about you.
This is why she brought it up to me too.
It's pretty amazing. It's really
It's
hard.
really hard, and I'm not perfect at it
Yeah.
because we genuinely want to be liked. We
Mm.
genuinely want our ideas to be accepted
And
as
approval
people.
from others.
Yes. And just here, okay, we're doing okay. We're on the right track with where we're going. And that happens sometimes, or at least the way I used to feel about it is that feedback that you get from people then lets you know you're on the right track.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, yeah, that's not the feedback I look for.
Yeah.
And
We
it's
look
funny.
for validation from others in things too.
Yeah, no, and it's because the book helped shape some of these things. And it's for me, it became once people started reading it and then they would see me and we would get to interact. It's always really fascinating to me because everybody connects with something different. And there was someone who was celebrating their 40 year of sobriety this month or this year, and they read the book. And because I talk about how I made a decision and a deal with God to stop drinking, they assumed that I was an alcoholic.
Mm.
And I thought, do I need to correct them on this? And I didn't. I just let
Okay.
him. I was like, because that's his thing, right? That's what connected him to the book. So if I explained to them the drinking it wasn't necessarily that I was a drunk or that I had a problem with it. It was that I was not wanting to find myself having a problem with it while
Mhm.
I was being a parent. And I also knew that was a slippery slope based on a number of other things.
Yeah.
So It was just this. But if I tell him that, then I take away the thing that
Mhm.
connected him to the story.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, I can't care.
Yeah.
It's not just about the negatives, it's also about the things that connect people to you. You got to
Yeah.
lean into those things, even if their idea of what your struggle may or may not have been with that is a little skewed. You can skew it in the right direction without taking their hope away.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I think that's something we can all do a little bit better job of, especially right now.
Yeah, for sure. So the book is called Canyon of Hope, and you can get it Amazon everywhere. Where
You
we?
can get it anywhere you buy books. You can get it at my web. You can get an autographed copy at ericdonaho.com or canyonofhope.com. Takes you there to as well. Amazon, Kindle,
Okay.
and the audio I hope to have out by the end of this quarter. I'm reading it and I have dyslexia and traumatic brain injury. And so
I'm
I'm a
sure I love reading
perfectionist.
those books or listening to those books when they're read by the author. I think they have such a bigger impact. So good job pushing through all that.
I wasn't going, to be honest with you. That was my wife. And the
Oh,
reason that she sold me on it is because then her point was that the kids then always have me telling them our
oh,
story.
I love that.
And I was like,
All right,
okay.
everybody, pay attention to the audio when it comes out. Now everybody's just going to listen to the audio
Well,
after
because
that.
there are going to be times where I'm going to break down and cry too. And so
I
it's
think
like,
that's what makes it more impactful when the author reads it.
and yes, so that's scheduled I start doing that in the next week. And
Amazing.
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric, for coming on here. This has been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for introducing my story and my book to
Yeah.
your audience. I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. It's an amazing story. You've been through so much, and I'm so sorry that you've been through so much, but you seem to have come out on the other side mostly better. So I'm happy about that. Do you have any parting words for my listeners?
Faith. If you are struggling with being upset or being angry or just genuinely finding yourself hopeless,
Mm.
it might be time to start dealing with and building faith in something. Doesn't have to be in what I believe. And for me, in the beginning, it was just in my wife and her faith. But you have to have faith in something to have a good life that's filled with lots of hope and light.
Yeah, amazing.
And continue to let God's light shine through you.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you for coming on, and thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.